The fist came down on the table, so hard the beer glasses jumped, and one of them shattered on the floor. Every head in the place turned. The big man was already standing, chest out, veins in his neck, screaming down at a stranger who had not moved an inch. The stranger just sat there, both hands flat on the wood in front of him. Calm. That kind of calm should have scared the loud one, but it didn't. He grabbed a fistful of the man's collar and yanked. Now here is the thing. The quiet one they called Ray had spent 30 years being underestimated by men exactly like this. What the champion did not know, could not know, was whose name was stitched inside that worn leather vest folded on the stool beside him. Who do you think walked through that door next? Stay with me on this one. Let me back this up a couple of hours, so you understand how a normal Tuesday night turned into the worst mistake one man ever made. The place was called the Ironwood, a low brick roadhouse out on the edge of a little high desert town, the kind of town where the gas station closes at 9 and everybody knows everybody's truck. Inside it smelled like fryer grease and spilled beer, and the same peanut shells they'd been sweeping up for 20 years. Neon in the window. A pool table with a rip in the felt. A jukebox nobody had unplugged since the 90s. It was a working man's bar. Guys came in after their shift, drank too, complained about their boss and went home. That was the whole rhythm of the Ironwood. Behind the bar that night, like every night, was Dale. Old boy, 60-some, run the place 30 years. And beside him, carrying trays, was a girl named Jess. 19, maybe 20. She'd been working there 4 months, ever since her mother got sick, and the hospital bills started stacking up on the kitchen counter like a second family. Jess worked doubles. She smiled at men who didn't deserve it because a good tip was a tank of gas or a copay, and she'd learned real quick which tables to watch and which ones to move past fast. She was saving for nursing school, a little at a time, in a coffee can on top of the refrigerator at home. Remember her. She matters more to this story than you'd think. That night the rhythm was broken by Cody Malone. Now Cody was a big deal in that county, or at least he thought so. 26 years old, undefeated in the regional cage fighting circuit, 11 wins, all knockouts. His face was on a poster taped to the bar door. He had a crew that followed him around, 3 or 4 guys who laughed at everything he said and paid for nothing. When Cody walked into a room, he wanted the room to notice. And usually it did, because he made sure of it. Loud voice. Gold chain. A way of clapping men on the shoulder just a little too hard, testing them, seeing who flinched. He'd come in around 8, already 3 beers deep from somewhere else, and he'd taken over the far corner like he owned it. He was celebrating. He had a title fight coming up, a real one, and a promoter from the city had been sniffing around. In Cody's mind, he was already famous. He just needed the world to catch up. You want to know where a man like that comes from. Because he wasn't born mean. Cody grew up 3 miles out of town, in a trailer with a father who hit first and asked nothing. By the time he was 15, he'd figured out the one law that ran his whole life. There's the one who swings and the one who covers up, and you get to pick, but you only get to pick once. Cody picked. He put on 40 pounds of muscle, and he never covered up again. And somewhere in there, the scared kid turned into the thing the scared kid had been afraid of, and Cody called that winning. That's the part nobody in the bar knew as they watched him swagger around. That's the part that matters when you get to the end. And then there was the man in the corner booth. Older fella. Maybe 55, maybe more, hard to say. Gray in his beard, gray at the temples, hair pulled back. He had the kind of face that had been out in weather its whole life. Sunlines. A quiet mouth. He wasn't big, not the way Cody was big, but there was something in the shoulders, something in the thickness of the forearms resting on the table that a smart man would have read as a warning. He wore a plain dark shirt. On the stool beside him sat a folded leather vest, worn soft, the kind of leather that only gets that way after decades of road. He had a cup of black coffee and a shot of whiskey he hadn't touched, and he was reading a folded-up newspaper like he had all the time in the world. Nobody knew him. He'd rolled in on a motorcycle just before dark, parked it out front, ordered coffee, and kept to himself. Jess had brought him that coffee. He'd thanked her by name. He'd read it off the little tag pinned to her apron, said "Thank you, Jess," quiet and plain, and left a folded bill under the saucer that she didn't look at until later. When she did, she stood real still for a second, because it was more than she'd make in tips the whole rest of the week. She didn't know what to make of it. She just knew that in 4 months of hauling trays, the men who treated her like a person and the men who tipped well were almost never the same men. And here was one who was both, sitting alone in the corner, bothering nobody. Dale had nodded at the stranger the way you nod at a man who clearly minds his own business. And the man had nodded back. That was it. That should have been the whole story of the stranger's night. But Cody Malone had a problem. Cody could not stand a man who didn't look at him. He noticed the stranger the way a bully always notices the one person in the room who isn't playing along. Everybody else glanced at Cody, laughed when he laughed, watched his hands when he shadow-boxed by the pool table for his buddies. The old man in the corner did none of that. He just read his paper and drank his coffee, and somehow that felt, to Cody, like an insult. Like a challenge. Like disrespect. But before Cody ever got to the old man, he got to Jess. She came by his table to clear the empties, and Cody caught her wrist. Not hard enough to bruise. Just hard enough to own it. "Where you going, sweetheart?" "Night's young." His crew grinned. Jess did the thing she'd trained herself to do, the small, tired smile, the little twist of the arm to get free without making it a thing. "I'll bring your next round," she said, and Cody held on half a second longer than he needed to, just to show her he could, then let go and laughed. "She likes me," he told his boys. Jess walked back to the bar with her jaw set and her eyes shining, and did not let one drop fall, because crying at a table like that only ever makes it worse. Dale saw it. Dale's hand tightened on the rag. But Dale had learned a long time ago what happens to a man his age and a bar his size when he tells Cody Malone to keep his hands to himself. So Dale said nothing, and he hated himself a little for it, the way he had 100 nights before. That was the first thing you need to hold on to. The old man in the corner saw it too. He set down his paper for a moment when it happened. He watched Jess walk back to the bar and blink it away. And then slow, he picked his paper back up. But something had gone still in his face. "File that away." "Hey," Cody called across the bar, bored now, looking for the next thing. Hey, old-timer. The man turned a page. Didn't look up. Cody's crew snickered, and that was gasoline. Cody stood, spread his arms wide, playing to his audience. I'm talking to you, Grandpa. You deaf. This is my night, and I like everybody in my house to say hello. Dale, behind the bar, set down the glass he was drying. Cody, leave the man be. He's not bothering anybody. I'm not bothering anybody, Cody said, mocking high-pitched, and his boys howled. He swaggered over, and here is where a normal man would have felt the floor tilt, would have sensed the thing sitting in that booth. Cody felt nothing. Cody had never in his life met a thing he couldn't hit. He came to the edge of the table, put both hands on it, and leaned down into the old man's space. You too good to talk to me, he said. You know who I am. And the old man finally looked up. Gray eyes. A steady. Not scared. Not angry. Just tired almost, the way you get tired of a certain kind of noise. He said very quietly, I know exactly what you are. And he went back to his paper. Now most men would have heard the danger in that. Cody heard only that he'd been dismissed, in front of his crew, in his own house. His face went red. And that was the moment the night turned. He reached down and snatched the coffee cup off the table and turned it over, slow, letting the coffee run across the newspaper and down onto the man's lap. Oops, he said. His boys roared. Clumsy me. The old man looked down at the ruined paper, at the coffee soaking into his jeans. He set the paper aside, folded it, actually folded it neat like it still mattered, and reached for a napkin. He didn't stand. He didn't shout. He just started to clean it up, and there was something in the patience of it that made half the bar go quiet, even while Cody's crew kept laughing. Jess started around the bar with a fresh rag before she even thought about it. Dale caught her arm. Don't, he said low. Not now, honey. Stay back here. She stopped. She didn't understand why the old man wasn't getting up, wasn't yelling, wasn't doing anything, and it made her chest hurt to watch it. This quiet person who'd been kind to her getting treated like a stain on the floor. She'd find out why soon enough. So would everybody. That's right, Cody said, misreading everything. Clean it up. That's a good boy. He grabbed the whiskey glass next and threw the shot in the man's face. The bar flinched as one. Somebody near the pool table said low, Come on, man, that's enough. That was a regular named Walt, a lineman, big through the chest, a man who on any other night might have said something more. But Walt looked around the room, at Cody's crew, at the size of the night, and Walt sat back down. That's what these rooms do. Everybody waits for somebody else to be the one. Nobody ever is. But Cody was flying now, drunk on beer and on being watched, and he did the thing that men like him always do. He went looking for the one thing that would humiliate the stranger completely. His eyes fell on the vest folded on the stool. The worn leather. He snatched it up before the old man could move. What's this? Cody said, holding it up high out of reach, like a kid keeping a toy from a smaller kid. You a biker, old man. You ride a little scooter. He shook it out to show his crew, laughing, and turned it around to read the patch on the back, ready with another joke. And the joke died in his throat. Because Cody Malone had never seen the real thing up close, but he'd seen it in stories. Everybody in that county had. The Death's Head. The Rockers, top and bottom. The 3 letters that a whole state knew by heart. His crew went quiet behind him one by one, like candles being pinched out. The laughing stopped. Somebody's beer bottle clinked as it was set down very carefully on a table. Dale, behind the bar, closed his eyes and let out a long, slow breath, because Dale knew. Dale had known the second the stranger walked in, and Dale had been praying all night that Cody would not do exactly what Cody had just done. Here's what Dale knew that nobody else did. 22 years back, when the Ironwood was 2 months from the bank taking it, 3 men in that same leather had stopped in out of the rain. Dale had poured them coffee and not asked questions and not looked at their backs too long, and one of them, quiet, gray-eyed even then, had watched Dale count the till twice and come up short and put his face in his hands at the end of the night when he thought the place was empty. That man had left an envelope under the register. No note. Enough to make the payment and the next one. Dale had never learned his name. He'd never had to. He'd have known those gray eyes anywhere, and he'd known them the second the stranger walked in tonight. And that is why Dale had spent the whole evening quietly terrified, because Dale understood exactly what Cody was playing with and could not find a way to say it out loud that wouldn't make it worse. Cody looked at the patch, and then he looked at the old man, and for the first time all night something crossed his face that wasn't arrogance. Confusion. The first cold edge of doubt. He didn't fully understand yet. He half-laughed weak. "So what?" he said. "You bought a jacket." And he tossed it in the man's face and turned back to his beer, trying to shove the moment away. Behind him, the old man caught the vest out of the air. Set it down gently. Wiped the whiskey off his cheek with the back of his hand. And for a few long minutes, that was all. Cody sat back down with his crew. The jukebox clicked over to a new song. Dale poured a fresh round for a couple of regulars who suddenly wanted to be anywhere but the corner. Jess brought the old man a glass of water and a clean towel without being asked, and set them down soft and whispered, "I'm so sorry," and he looked up at her and said just as soft, "Not your fault, Jess. You go on and stay behind that bar a while." Something in how he said it, calm and certain, like a man giving an order he knew would be followed, made the hair stand up on her arms. She went behind the bar. The stranger dabbed at his jeans, sipped the water, and the whole place eased down half a notch, telling itself the ugly part was over. Just a drunk being a drunk. Nothing more would come of it. In a small town on a Tuesday, you learn to let these things pass. Then out in the dark beyond the front windows, an engine growled. Then another. Then 10 more, then 20, until the glass in the windows was buzzing and the neon sign was shaking on its hooks. Cody Malone stopped with his beer halfway to his mouth. Because a sound like that only means one thing, and it means it is already too late to take anything back. This is the part where you understand the mistake was never really about a spilled cup of coffee. When Cody threw that vest, he thought he was pushing around one tired old man. He wasn't. Every patch like the one on that stool is a promise. It says, "Touch me and you are not fighting a person. You are fighting an entire brotherhood, one that keeps score, that never forgets, and that always, always comes for its own." Cody hadn't insulted a stranger. He had declared war on an organization that spanned 3 states, and he'd done it in a room with one door. And if you're still with me and you want to see how this lands, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button, because it is about to land hard. Here's the piece Cody couldn't have known. When Jess had brought that second glass of water, the old man had, very quietly with one thumb, sent a single text under the table. He hadn't planned to. He'd sat down tonight wanting coffee, and a paper and 30 miles of empty highway after. But a man watches another man grab a young waitress by the wrist for sport, and then pour coffee in his lap for laughs, and something old and settled makes a decision the rest of him only finds out about later. 2 words. A pin on a map. That's all it took. Because 40 miles up the interstate, in a clubhouse with a gravel lot, sat men who would drop anything at all, when that particular phone lit up with that particular name. The headlights swept across the front windows in a long, slow wash, one after another, filling the parking lot. Engines cut, and the silence that followed was worse than the noise. Boots on gravel. A lot of them. The front door of the Ironwood opened, and the temperature of the whole room seemed to drop. They came in without hurry. That was the frightening thing. Nobody rushed. Nobody shouted. Big men in the same worn leather, patches on their backs, filling the doorway and then the floor, quiet and unhurried, the way men move when they have absolutely nothing to fear from anyone in the building. They fanned out along the walls. One of them pulled the door shut behind him and stood in front of it, arms folded. Another walked to the back and checked the hallway to the restrooms and the kitchen, calm as an inspector, and came back and gave a small nod. In under a minute, the only exits from the Ironwood belonged to them. Cody's crew had gone the color of paper. One of them, the youngest, a kid named Travis who'd known Cody since Little League and had spent the last 2 years laughing at things that weren't funny because it was easier than not, actually stood up like he might make a break for it. A man near the wall simply looked at him, didn't even move, just looked, and the kid sat back down and put his hands flat on the table. And in that moment, something happened to Travis that would stick. He looked over at Cody, at his friend, the champion, the poster on the door, and for the first time he saw him the way the rest of the room had always seen him, and he was ashamed of every laugh he'd ever spent. Small thing. Hold onto it anyway. And still the old man in the corner hadn't moved. The bikers weren't looking at Cody. That was the part that started to break him. 20-some hard men had just walked into the room, and not one of them was looking at the county's undefeated champion. They were all looking at the quiet man in the corner booth. Waiting. And then the biggest of them, a mountain of a man with a gray braid and a scar through one eyebrow, crossed the floor, stopped a respectful distance from the booth, and said the words that turned Cody Malone's stomach to ice water. "Boss, we got the call. You all right?" "Boss." The old man set down his water. He looked up and he looked around the room, slow, taking it all in. The regulars pressed back against the bar, Dale frozen with a rag in his hand, Jess with both hands over her mouth, Cody's crew shaking, and Cody himself sitting there with his mouth open and his big shoulders suddenly looking a lot smaller. Then the old man stood up. He was not a tall man. He didn't have to be. When he stood, the whole room stood with him, in a way, everybody's attention snapping to him like iron to a magnet. He picked up the vest off the stool, the one Cody had thrown in his face, and he shrugged it on, slow, settling it onto his shoulders, and for the first time everyone in the Ironwood saw the front of it. The name. The title under it. President. His name's Ray. Dale said quietly, to nobody, to everybody, like a man confessing something. Ray Kessler. He built the whole thing. 30 years he's run that club. Dale swallowed. I didn't say nothing because I figured he wanted his coffee in peace. He looked at Jess. And because a long time ago that man saved this bar, and I never even got to thank him. So no, I wasn't going to be the one to tell Cody Malone, whose paper he was pouring coffee on. Ray buttoned the vest. He walked out from behind the table, and the big man with the braids stepped aside for him with something close to reverence. Ray crossed the floor slow, and he came to stand in front of Cody Malone's table. And the champion, the 11-0 knockout artist, the poster on the door, could not make himself stand up. On your feet, Ray said. It wasn't loud. That was the thing about Ray, you'll notice, all the way through this. He never once raised his voice. He didn't have to. When you have 20 men who would walk through fire for you standing at your back, you can afford to speak softly. Cody stood, knees not quite working, and now the height difference didn't matter at all, because the whole architecture of who was dangerous in that room had been rebuilt from the ground up. A minute ago, Ray said, you had a lot to say. You had questions. You wanted to know if I knew who you were. He tilted his head. I do. I've known guys like you my whole life. Loud in a room full of people who are scared of you. Big when the other guys got nowhere to go. He nodded at Cody's crew without looking at them. Surrounded by fellas who laugh so they don't get hit. He reached out, slow, and Cody flinched. Hard, the champion actually flinched, and every man in that room saw it. But Ray didn't hit him. He just picked up Cody's beer off the table, the way Cody had picked up his coffee, and he turned it over slow, and let it run out across the wood and down onto Cody's jeans, splashing on his shoes. Oops, Ray said. Clumsy me. Nobody laughed. Cody stood there with beer soaking into his pants and his face burning and his eyes wet and shining. And he understood, finally, all the way down, exactly what it had felt like to be the man in the corner an hour ago. To be humiliated in a room full of people, with no way out, by someone you couldn't beat. Now, Ray said, I'm going to tell you what happens next, and you're going to listen close, because I'm only saying it one time. He let that sit. The engines outside had gone silent. The jukebox had ended and not started again. You could hear the fryer ticking in the kitchen and Cody's own breath coming fast and shallow. You put your hands on me, Ray said. You threw whiskey in my face. And you took this vest, this exact vest, off that stool, and you held it up in the air like it was a joke. His voice dropped even lower, and somehow that was the most terrifying it got all night. You don't know what that patch costs. What men gave to earn the right to wear it. Friends of mine are in the ground with that on their back. And you waved it around a bar to make your buddies laugh. He paused. He looked just for a second over at the bar at Jess. But you want to know the thing that actually got you here, he said. It wasn't the coffee. It wasn't the whiskey. I've had coffee poured on me by better men than you and let it slide. It was that girl's wrist. I sat there and I watched you grab that girl who's working a double so somebody in her family can see a doctor. And I watched you hold on an extra second just to teach her she couldn't get away. That's when I made the call. You picked on the one person in this room with the least in the world to fight back with, and you did it for fun. That's the moment you stopped being a loudmouth and started being something I don't allow to keep happening in a room I'm sitting in. Ray reached out and, very deliberately, closed his hand around the gold chain at Cody's neck. He didn't yank it. He just held it, so Cody could feel exactly how easy it would be. By every rule I've lived by for 30 years. Ray said, what I'm supposed to do right now is teach you a lesson you'd carry for the rest of your life. And every man in this room came here tonight expecting to watch me do it. You understand that? Any word from me and there is no title fight. There's no promoter. There's no more Cody Malone. Just a hospital, or worse, and a whole lot of people who saw nothing. Cody was crying now, openly, this big undefeated fighter, tears running down into the beer on his shirt. Please, he said, so quiet you almost couldn't hear it. Please. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, man. I didn't know. No. Ray agreed. You didn't know. That's the whole problem, son. You never think there's a bigger dog. You've spent your whole life being the biggest thing in every little room, and you decided that meant you could do anything to anybody, long as they looked small enough. There's 100 Codys, and every single one of them meets his Ray eventually. Tonight was just yours. He let go of the chain. He stepped back, and the men along the wall shifted their weight, ready, waiting for the word, and every soul in that bar held their breath, because they were sure they were about to watch a young man get taken apart. Ray looked at Cody for a long moment. Then he looked past him, at the poster on the door with Cody's face on it, undefeated, the pride of the county. And something in the old man's eyes changed. Not softened exactly, but decided. Here's your lesson, Ray said. And it's the hardest one there is, so pay attention. He gestured around the room, at his men, at all that quiet power that had filled the place in under a minute. I could end you tonight, and nobody here would say a word. You know it. I know it. Everybody drinking in this bar knows it. He leaned in. And I'm not going to lay a finger on you. You want to know why? Cody could barely shake his head. Because the man I was at your age would have. Ray said, I came up the same way you did, son. I know that trailer. I know that father. I know the day a scared kid decides he's never going to be the one who covers up again, because I had that day too. And it cost me. It cost me 20 years and a lot of friends before I figured out. I just turned into the exact thing I'd been so afraid of. He let that land. Cody had gone very still, because how did the old man know? How could he possibly know? The strong thing and the loud thing are not the same thing. Ray said, You've got them backwards. You think being strong means making a waitress cry, making an old man clean up coffee off his own lap so your friends laugh. That's not strength, son. That's the smallest a man can be. He straightened up. Real strength is what everybody in this room is watching me not do right now. He turned to Dale at the bar. What's the damage? The glass, the mess, his tab, the coffee I never got to finish. He almost smiled. All of it. Dale, stunned, stammered out a number. Ray pulled a roll of bills from his jeans and counted out 3 times that much and set it on the bar. For the trouble, he said. And a round for the house, for everybody who had to sit through this. Then he peeled off more, a thick fold of it, and set it separate and pushed it toward Jess. That's yours. Not tips, not the house, yours. For the wrist and for the school you're saving for. Jess started to shake her head, started to say it was too much, and Ray just looked at her, steady, and said, "A man tried to make you feel small tonight, and you kept your feet the whole time and never spilled a drop. That's worth more than what's in my pocket. Take it and go be a nurse." She took it. She was crying. She wasn't the only one. Then he turned back to Cody one last time. "You've got that title fight," he said. "I know all about it. I know more about your life than you'd believe, starting tonight. So here's the deal, and it's the only one you get. You're going to be a different man from this minute on. You're going to find every person you ever pushed around in a room like this, and you're going to make it right. You're going to start with that girl behind the bar, and then you're going to keep going, because I promise you the list is long. And you're going to fight clean and live clean, because I promise you from now on, somebody's always going to be watching. You won't see us, but we'll see you." He tapped Cody once, gently on the chest, right over his hammering heart. "You got a second chance tonight that a lot better men than you never got. Don't you waste it." And that was it. Ray Kessler nodded to the man with the gray braid, and the Brotherhood began to file out as quiet as they'd come, boots on the floorboards, and one by one, the engines turned over out in the dark until the whole night was roaring again, and then, wave by wave, rolling away down the highway. Ray was the last to go. At the door, he stopped and looked back at the corner booth where he'd sat all evening minding his own business, at the coffee-stained newspaper still folded on the table. He nodded at Dale. "Appreciate the coffee," he said. "It was good coffee." And then he was gone, and the last motorcycle faded off into the desert, and the Ironwood was just a small brick bar on the edge of a small town again, with the neon buzzing in the window. For a long moment nobody moved. Then Cody Malone sat down, slow, in the middle of the wreckage of his own big night, and put his face in his hands, and his crew didn't say anything because there was nothing left to laugh at. Travis, the kid who'd known him since Little League, got up quiet, put a hand on Cody's shoulder for a second, and then walked out the front door into the dark and did not come back, and somehow that was the loudest thing anybody did all night. Dale came around the bar with a towel and a mop. He set the towel down in front of Cody without a word, and after a while Cody took it, and he got down on his knees on that dirty floor, and he started cleaning up the broken glass and the spilled beer himself. Nobody made him. That was the thing. Nobody in that room would ever have to make Cody Malone do anything again. He'd finally met the one man he couldn't beat, and the strangest part, the part he'd think about for the rest of his life, was that the man had let him walk away whole. When he was done, he stood up, and he walked over to the bar, and he stood in front of Jess with his hands empty at his sides and his eyes on the floor, and he said the first true thing he'd said in years. "I'm sorry." She looked at him a long moment. She didn't smile, but she nodded once, and for that night that was enough. They say he did change after that. They say he found the waitress from a bar 2 towns over, the one he'd made cry back in the spring, and he apologized to her face and left her a tip that covered a month of rent. They say he tracked down 6 more, men and women both, and squared what he could and took the ones he couldn't fix on the chin without an excuse. They say Jess started nursing school that fall and that Cody, of all people, showed up the day she got her acceptance letter with a card he'd clearly spent too long on, signed just, "Proud of you. See." They say he won that title fight and never once ran his mouth about it, and when they raised his hand in that cage, he looked less like a man who'd won something and more like a man who was trying to deserve something. And they say that every so often, when Cody's in a room and it goes quiet, he still looks at the door, half expecting to see a worn leather vest and a pair of steady gray eyes. Because somewhere out there on the highway, an old man is riding, minding his own business, drinking his coffee black, carrying 30 years of a brotherhood on his back. And he taught a whole barroom something they'd never forget. The loudest man in the room is almost never the most dangerous one. And the quiet stranger in the corner, the one you think is beneath you, the one you're so sure is small, believe me, you never, ever know whose name is stitched inside that vest on the